The morning sun cast long shadows across the outdoor shooting range as Sarah Martinez pulled into the gravel parking lot. Her old Honda Civic looked out of place among the pickup trucks and SUVs that dominated the space. She sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching other shooters emerge from their vehicles with expensive gun cases and tactical gear. Sarah's equipment was different. She carried a simple black duffel bag that had seen better days. Her clothing was unremarkable: faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and worn sneakers. Nothing about her appearance suggested she belonged at one of the most challenging shooting ranges in Colorado. The Rocky Mountain Precision Range is known throughout the state for attracting serious shooters. Military personnel, law enforcement officers, and competitive marksmen came here to test their skills on targets that stretched out to 1,000 yards. The facility's reputation was built on difficulty, and many newcomers left feeling humbled after their first visit. Sarah approached the registration desk where a bearded man in camouflage clothing looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. His name tag read Mike, and his expression suggested he'd already decided she was wasting his time. "First time here?" Mike asked, his tone suggesting he hoped it would be her last. "Yes," Sarah replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She had always been soft-spoken, a trait that had served her well in her previous life, but often caused people to underestimate her now. "We've got different ranges depending on your experience level," Mike continued, pulling out a laminated map of the facility. "The beginner's range is right here, 25 yards. Most ladies start there with a .22 or maybe a small pistol." Sarah studied the map carefully, her dark eyes moving across the various ranges marked in different colors. The longest range was marked in red, 1,000 yards, advanced shooters only. Mike noticed where she was looking and chuckled. "That's our precision rifle range. We require proof of advanced training or military experience to use that one. Insurance liability, you understand." "I understand," Sarah said, her voice still quiet but steady. "What do I need to show you?" Mike blinked, surprised by the question. Most beginners didn't even ask about the advanced ranges. Military ID, law enforcement credentials, or certification from a recognized marksmanship program. "Do you have any of those?" Sarah reached into her wallet and produced a small card. Mike examined it, his eyebrows rising slightly. It was a Department of Defense ID card, but it didn't indicate her specific role or unit. The photo showed the same quiet woman standing before him, but something in her eyes in the picture seemed different, more intense, more focused. "Army?" Mike asked, his tone becoming slightly more respectful. "Something like that," Sarah replied, avoiding specifics as she had learned to do over the years. The truth was complicated. Most people weren't cleared to hear it anyway. Mike processed her paperwork and handed her a range pass. "Lane 15 on the precision range is open. You'll need to bring your rifle up to the shooting line for inspection before you begin." Sarah nodded and made her way to the range. The precision shooting area was intimidating. A long, narrow corridor with concrete walls and steel targets barely visible in the distance. Several other shooters were already positioned at their lanes, their expensive rifles mounted on sophisticated bipods and rests. She found lane 15 and began unpacking her equipment. From the worn duffel bag, she withdrew a rifle that made several nearby shooters take notice. It wasn't the fanciest weapon on the range, but it was clearly well-maintained and purposefully configured. The scope was high-quality military surplus, and every component showed signs of professional use. As Sarah set up her shooting position, she became aware of the attention she was drawing. Conversations at nearby lanes had become hushed whispers, and she could feel eyes upon her. She had experienced this before, the moment when people realized there might be more to the quiet woman than they had assumed. At the lane next to hers, a group of men in expensive shooting gear were discussing their morning's performance. Their leader, a tall man with graying hair and confident bearing, had been achieving respectable groups at 600 yards. His friends were impressed. Praising his technique and equipment, Sarah settled into her shooting position, her movements practiced and economical. She didn't rush through her setup like an eager amateur, nor did she take excessive time like someone trying to appear more skilled than they were. Every action seemed purposeful and automatic, as a result of countless hours of repetition. She adjusted her scope and studied. the wind flags positioned at various distances down the range. The morning breeze was light but shifting, creating a challenge that would test any shooter's ability to read conditions and adjust accordingly. The target she had selected was at 800 yards. It's not the maximum distance available, but far enough to separate skilled shooters from pretenders. At that distance, a target looked impossibly small, and factors like wind, temperature, and even the Earth's rotation could affect bullet placement. Sarah chambered her first round and settled behind her rifle. Her breathing slowed, and her entire body seemed to relax into the shooting position. The transformation was subtle but noticeable to anyone who knew what to look for. The quiet, unassuming woman had shifted into a different mode entirely. She fired her first shot, and the sound echoed across the range. Through her scope, she could see the bullet hole appear in the target's center ring. It was a good shot, but not exceptional by the standards of this range. Several other shooters had achieved similar accuracy. Her second shot followed quickly, the rhythm natural and unforced. Another center hit slightly closer to the bullseye than the first. By her third shot, the nearby conversations had stopped entirely. The group at lane 14 was watching her openly now. Their own shooting temporarily forgotten, Sarah continued methodically, each shot following the same careful process. Breathe, aim, squeeze, follow through. The fundamentals she had learned years ago in a very different context, but the principles remained unchanged. By her 10th shot, she had created a group that most shooters would have been proud to achieve at half the distance. The man from lane 14 approached during a ceasefire period, his curiosity finally overcoming his initial assumptions. He had been shooting competitively for 20 years and recognized exceptional marksmanship when he saw it. "Excellent shooting," he said, extending his hand. "I'm David Chen. Mind if I ask where you learned to shoot like that?" Sarah looked up from her rifle, her dark eyes meeting his. For a moment, he thought he saw something familiar in her gaze. The same look he had seen in the eyes of the most skilled operators he had worked with during his own military career. "Practice," she said simply, her voice still quiet but carrying a weight that suggested there was much more to the story. David Chen studied the woman before him with growing interest. In his 23 years as a Navy SEAL, he had developed an eye for identifying fellow warriors, and something about Sarah's demeanor triggered his instincts. Her shooting was exceptional, but it was more than that. It was the way she carried herself, the efficiency of her movements, and the calm focus that seemed to surround her like an invisible shield. "That's quite a group you've put together," David said, nodding toward her target. "Most shooters would need years to develop that kind of consistency at this distance." Sarah glanced at her target through the spotting scope, evaluating her work with the critical eye of someone who had once depended on such precision for survival. 10 shots clustered within a 3-inch circle, at 800 yards respectable, but she knew she could do better. "The wind's been tricky this morning," she replied, making a small adjustment to her scope. "It's shifting about every 2 minutes, coming from the northwest, but dropping into the valley and swirling back." David was impressed by her analysis. Reading wind conditions was an advanced skill that separated amateur shooters from true marksmen. Most people could hit a target on a calm day, but adjusting for environmental factors required experience and understanding that couldn't be taught from a book. "Sound like you've spent time at distance," he observed, settling into a more comfortable position to continue the conversation. "Military background?" Sarah hesitated, as she always did when people asked about her past. The truth was classified at levels that most people, even those with security clearances, would never access. Her 8 years with a special operations unit that officially didn't exist had taught her the value of keeping her history vague. "Some government work," she said finally, which was technically accurate, if incomplete. "Nothing too exciting." David smiled at her evasiveness, recognizing it as the standard response of someone accustomed to operational security. He had given similar non-answers countless times. Himself, when civilians asked about his own career, the morning progressed with other shooters, gradually taking notice of Sarah's performance. Word spread quietly through the range that someone special was shooting at lane 15. Several accomplished marksmen found reasons to walk past her position, glancing at her targets with a mixture of curiosity and respect that exceptional shooting always generated, Sarah remained focused on her work, methodically working through different distances and conditions. She moved her target out to 900 yards, then to the maximum 1,000-yard distance. Each adjustment required recalculating her scope settings and reading the wind patterns at the extended range. But she made the transitions smoothly at 1,000 yards. The target was barely visible even through high-powered optics. Most shooters considered hitting anything at that distance to be an accomplishment regardless of accuracy. Consistent precision at such extreme range required a combination of technical skill, equipment knowledge, and something harder to define: an intuitive understanding of ballistics that came only from extensive experience. Sarah's first shot at the extended distance took longer to set up than her previous efforts. She spent several minutes studying the wind flags, noting how the conditions changed along the bullet's flight path. The mathematics involved were complex, calculating drop, drift, and the effects of atmospheric pressure and temperature on bullet performance. When she finally fired, the report of her rifle was followed by the distinctive ping of a steel target struck dead center. Through the spotting scope, David could see the bullet hole appear in the target's X-string. It was an exceptional shot by any standard. "Damn," muttered one of the other shooters who had been watching. "I've been trying to hit that target consistently for 3 years." Sarah's second shot at 1,000 yards was even better, striking within an inch of the first. By her fifth shot, she had created a group that most competitive shooters would have been thrilled to achieve at half the distance. The small crowd that had gathered was no longer trying to hide their amazement. David found himself studying Sarah with professional interest. Her shooting technique was flawless, but it was her mental approach that truly impressed him. She showed no excitement over exceptional shots and no frustration with minor imperfections. Each round was treated with the same methodical preparation and execution, suggesting a level of discipline that came from high-stakes training during another ceasefire period. David approached her again. "I have to ask, what unit were you with? That kind of shooting doesn't come from basic training." Sarah looked up from cleaning her rifle, her dark eyes meeting his directly for the first time. For a moment he saw something that confirmed his suspicions: the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen combat, combined with the quiet confidence of an elite operator. "I can't really talk about it," she said, her voice carrying a finality that discouraged further questions. "But I appreciate the conversation. It's been a while since I've shot with people who understand what they're seeing." David nodded, respecting her boundaries while filing away the information. Her evasiveness only confirmed his growing certainty that Sarah was far more than she appeared. In his experience, the most dangerous operators were often the quietest ones, the people who could blend into any crowd but possess skills that set them apart from ordinary civilians. As the morning continued, Sarah's reputation spread beyond the precision rifle range. Shooters from other areas of the facility began finding excuses to visit the long-range section, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious woman who was reportedly shooting groups that defied belief. Mike, the range officer who had initially dismissed her, made several trips to Lane 15 under the pretense of routine safety checks. Each time, he lingered longer than necessary, studying her targets and shaking his head in amazement. In 15 years of running this range, he told David during one of his visits, "I've never seen shooting like that. Not from anyone, including some pretty serious military guys." Sarah seemed oblivious to the attention she was generating, focused entirely on her shooting. She had moved beyond simple accuracy exercises and was now working on more complex scenarios, shooting from different positions, engaging multiple targets in sequence, and adapting to changing conditions as the morning wind patterns shifted. Her final exercise of the morning was the most impressive. She set up targets at 600, 800, and 1,000 yards, then engaged each one in rapid succession. The transitions between targets required significant scope adjustments and ballistic calculations. But she moved through the sequence with practiced efficiency. 3 shots, 3 different distances, 3 perfect hits. The small crowd that had gathered burst into spontaneous applause. A rare occurrence at the typically reserved facility, Sarah packed her equipment with the same quiet efficiency she had displayed throughout the morning. As she prepared to leave, David made one final approach. "I don't know what your story is," he said, "but I know exceptional talent when I see it. If you're ever interested in some friendly competition, or just want someone to shoot with who appreciates what you can do, I'm here most Saturday mornings." Sarah shouldered her rifle case and looked at him thoughtfully. "I might take you up on that," she said. "It's been nice to remember what I'm capable of." As she walked toward the parking lot, every person at the range watched her go. The quiet woman who had arrived as an unknown had left as a legend, at least in the small world of precision shooting. But David suspected that her shooting skills were just the tip of an iceberg, and he found himself hoping she would return the following week. The following Saturday morning brought unseasonably warm weather to the Rocky Mountain foothills. Creating challenging conditions for precision shooting, David Chen arrived at the range early, as was his custom, found himself glancing toward the parking lot more frequently than usual. He wondered if the mysterious woman from the previous week would return, or if her visit had been a one-time occurrence. Sarah Martinez sat in her Honda Civic at the far end of the parking lot, debating whether to enter the range. The previous week had awakened something inside her that she had tried to keep, buried since leaving active service 3 years ago. The familiar weight of the rifle, the mental discipline required for precision shooting, and the satisfaction of perfect shot placement had reminded her of who she used to be. For 3 years, she had worked as a night shift security guard at a medical supply warehouse, a job that paid the bills but left her feeling invisible and disconnected from her former life. She had chosen the position specifically because it required minimal interaction with other people and allowed her to fade into the background. After 8 years of high-intensity operations where every decision could mean life or death, anonymity had felt like a relief, but the shooting session had reawakened. Something deeper, the part of her that had thrived on challenge and excellence, that had found purpose in pushing human capabilities to their absolute limits. She realized how much she missed the camaraderie of working with people who understood her skills and shared her commitment to perfection. David had been checking his watch when he saw the familiar Honda enter the parking lot. He felt a surge of anticipation mixed with curiosity. Something about Sarah intrigued him beyond her exceptional marksmanship. In his years leading SEAL teams, he had learned to read people quickly, and she possessed the subtle indicators of someone with serious operational experience. Sarah approached the registration desk with the same quiet demeanor as the previous week, but Mike greeted her with notably more respect. Word of her shooting had spread throughout the local shooting community, and several regular customers had specifically asked when the mystery woman might return. "Lane 15 is reserved for you if you want it," Mike said, handing her the range pass before she even asked. "Fair warning, though, you've got some admirers today. A few of the competitive shooters heard about last week and specifically came hoping to meet you." Sarah glanced toward the precision range and saw that it was busier than the previous week. Several expensive vehicles in the parking lot suggested the presence of serious shooters with equally serious budgets. She felt a familiar flutter of anxiety at the thought of increased attention, but also a competitive spark she hadn't experienced in years. David was waiting at lane 14 when she arrived, his equipment already set up and his rifle zeroed for the day's conditions. He greeted her with a genuine smile and a respectful nod that acknowledged her skills without making a big show of it. "Wind's tricky today," he said by way of greeting, "coming from 3 different directions depending on the distance. Should make for some interesting shooting." Sarah appreciated his matter-of-fact approach. Some shooters might have tried to impress her with talk of their own accomplishments or asked intrusive questions about her background. David simply treated her as a fellow serious shooter. She felt comfortable and familiar. As she set up her equipment, Sarah became aware of the other shooters on the range. At lane 10, a group of competitive shooters had expensive precision rifles and were engaged in animated discussion about technique and equipment. Their leader, a man in his 50s wearing a shooting vest covered in sponsor patches, kept glancing in her direction with obvious curiosity at lane 18. A younger man in tactical gear was working with what appeared to be a custom-built rifle system that probably cost more than Sarah's car. His shooting was competent, but not exceptional, and he seemed more interested in the appearance of being a serious shooter than in actually developing his skills. Sarah began her morning routine with a few warm-up shots at 600 yards. Reacquainting herself with her rifle and the day's conditions, Her first group was respectable but not spectacular. 4-inch cluster that would have satisfied most shooters, but left her slightly disappointed. Ammunition shooting a little differently today, David observed, studying her target through his spotting scope. Might be the temperature change affecting the powder burn. Sarah nodded, appreciating his analytical approach. She made a small adjustment to her scope and fired another group, this one tighter and better centered. The conversation with David felt natural and professional. The kind of technical discussion she had missed during her years of isolation. The competitive shooter from Lane 10 finally approached during a ceasefire period, introducing himself as Marcus Webb, a regional precision rifle champion with multiple tournament victories. His manner was friendly but carried an undertone of challenge that Sarah recognized immediately. "I heard about your shooting last week," Marcus said, his tone suggesting polite skepticism. "Pretty impressive scores for someone using factory ammunition and military surplus equipment." Sarah looked up from her rifle, noting the subtle implication that her success was somehow due to luck rather than skill. She had encountered this attitude before, the assumption that expensive equipment was necessary for precision shooting, and that anyone achieving exceptional results with basic gear must be somehow cheating or exaggerating. "The rifle shoots what I give it," she replied simply, her voice carrying no defensiveness or challenge. "Good fundamentals matter more than fancy equipment." Marcus smiled, but there was something calculating in his expression. "I'd be interested to see how those fundamentals hold up at longer distances with some real competition." "Want to make things interesting?" David sensed the shift in atmosphere and moved closer to the conversation. He recognized the type accomplished shooters who couldn't resist testing themselves against anyone who threatened their status as the best on the range. Marcus was skilled, but he had also never faced anyone with Sarah's apparent background. "What kind of competition did you have in mind?" Sarah asked, her tone remaining neutral, but with a hint of interest that suggested Marcus might be getting more than he bargained for. "Standard precision challenge," Marcus replied. 5 shots each at 800, 900, and 1,000 yards. Best total score wins. I've got $50 that says my equipment and experience will make the difference. Sarah considered the proposal for a moment. Part of her wanted to avoid the attention that such a competition would generate. But another part, the competitive warrior that had been dormant for 3 years, was stirring to life. She had spent too long hiding her capabilities, too long pretending to be less than she was. "Make it interesting," she said quietly. "Winner takes $100, and loser buys lunch for everyone on the range." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. He had expected her to decline or suggest a smaller wager. Her confidence was either impressive or foolish, and he was about to find out which word of the competition spread quickly through the range. And soon, every shooter had found reasons to move closer to lanes 10 and 15. David felt a mixture of excitement and concern as he watched Sarah check her rifle and begin calculating the ballistics for the extended distances. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Marcus is good, really good. He's won state championships." Sarah looked at him with eyes that seemed older than her years, carrying a weight of experience that suddenly made her age difficult to determine. "I appreciate the concern," she said. "But I didn't survive 8 years of real-world shooting by backing down from challenges," was the first direct reference she had made to her operational background. And David filed the information away, with growing certainty about who he was dealing with. As Sarah began her final preparations for the competition, he found himself wondering what kind of missions had required the level of marksmanship she was about to demonstrate. The competition drew every shooter on the range like spectators to a prize fight. Even the staff members found reasons to visit the precision rifle section, creating an impromptu gallery along the firing line. Sarah felt the familiar pre-engagement calm settling over her. The same mental state she had cultivated during countless high-stakes operations where failure meant more than just embarrassment. Marcus Webb made a show of his preparation, methodically cleaning his rifle and adjusting his high-end optics while discussing the technical specifications of his custom ammunition with his entourage of admirers. His rifle was a work of art, a precision-built system worth more than many people's annual salary, complete with a computer-assisted scope that could calculate ballistic solutions automatically. In contrast, Sarah's preparation was quiet and efficient. She checked her rifle's zero with a few practice shots, noted the wind conditions at various distances, and performed the mental calculations that would guide her shooting. Her equipment looked modest compared to Marcus's setup, but David noticed that every component was perfectly maintained and purposefully selected. "Ladies first," Marcus said with exaggerated courtesy, gesturing toward the 800-yard target. "Unless you'd prefer to watch me set the standard you'll need to beat." Sarah settled behind her rifle without responding to the verbal gamesmanship. She had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, especially in situations where lives depended on performance. The familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder felt like coming home, and she allowed her breathing to slow and deepen. Her first shot broke cleanly, the sound echoing across the range, followed by the distant ping of the steel target. Through the spotting scope, David could see the bullet hole appear in the target's center ring, a perfect 10. The small crowd murmured appreciatively, but Sarah showed no reaction, ready preparing for her second shot. Shot after shot, she worked through her 5-round string with mechanical precision. Each bullet struck the target with devastating accuracy, creating a group that would have been impressive at half the distance. When the scoring was tallied, she had achieved a perfect 50 out of 50 possible points at 800 yards. Marcus stepped up to the firing line with visible confidence, but David noticed a slight tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Sarah's performance had been exceptional, and the pressure was now on him to match it. His first shot was excellent, a solid 9 that drew approving nods from his supporters. His shooting was textbook perfect, each shot carefully calculated and precisely executed. Marcus was indeed skilled, and his expensive equipment performed flawlessly. When he finished his string, he had scored 46 out of 50 points, an excellent score that would have won most competitions. But 4 points behind Sarah's perfect performance. "Lucky wind conditions," Marcus muttered, though his tone suggested he didn't quite believe his own excuse. The wind had been challenging throughout the morning, and anyone achieving consistent accuracy deserved credit for skill, not luck. The 900-yard stage presented increased difficulty, with wind conditions that required constant adjustment and ballistic calculations that pushed both shooters' abilities. At this distance, even minor errors in judgment or technique would be magnified into significant misses. Sarah approached the longer distance with the same methodical preparation, but David noticed subtle changes in her routine. She spent more time studying the wind flags, and her pre-shot ritual became even more deliberate. The extra distance was revealing the depth of her experience. She knew exactly how much additional care was required. Her first shot at 900 yards was another perfect 10, striking the target's center with authority that suggested the distance was well within her capabilities. The crowd was no longer murmuring appreciatively. They were watching in stunned silence as Sarah displayed a level of marksmanship that few had ever witnessed. By her fourth shot, she had created another perfect group, with all 4 bullets clustered within the target's inner ring. Her final shot was the best of all, striking dead center and completing another perfect score. 50 out of 50 at 900 yards, a feat that most competitive shooters would consider the achievement of a lifetime. Marcus stepped up to the line with growing tension. It's visible in his movements. The pressure of trying to match Sarah's performance was affecting his normally smooth technique. His first shot was a solid 9, but his second drifted slightly wide for an 8. The mathematical reality was becoming clear. He was falling further behind with each stage. When
Marcus
completed his string at 900 yards, he had scored 43 points, still excellent shooting by any reasonable standard, but now 7 points behind Sarah's continued perfection. The crowd sensed that they were witnessing something special, and conversations had dropped to whispers. The final stage at 1,000 yards would determine the competition's outcome, though the mathematical reality was that Marcus needed perfection while Sarah could afford some margin for error. At this extreme distance, the targets appeared as tiny dots, even through powerful optics, and environmental factors became critical elements in successful shot placement. Sarah took extra time preparing for the longest distance, studying wind patterns and atmospheric conditions with the intensity of someone whose life had once depended on such observations. The silence on the range was complete now, with every person present understanding they were watching something extraordinary unfold. Her first shot at 1,000 yards seemed to hang in the air forever before the distant ping confirmed another perfect hit. David found himself holding his breath as he watched Sarah work through her routine, each shot building on the previous one in a demonstration of consistency that defied belief. When her spotting scope confirmed her fifth and final shot as another perfect 10, the range erupted in spontaneous applause. Sarah had achieved something that most shooters considered impossible: a perfect score across all three distances. 150 points out of 150 possible. Marcus approached his final string with the resignation of someone who knew the competition was already over. But his professionalism demanded that he complete the challenge with dignity. His shooting at 1,000 yards was his best of the day, but still fell short of the perfection that would have been required to match Sarah's performance. As the final scores were tallied and announced, the crowd's applause was accompanied by something deeper, a recognition that they had witnessed a display of human capability that existed at the very edge of what was possible. Sarah had not just won the competition. She had redefined what winning looked like. Marcus approached her with obvious respect, extending his hand in genuine congratulation. "I've been shooting competitively for 15 years, he said, "and I've never seen anything like that." That wasn't just good shooting, that was something else entirely. Sarah accepted his handshake with quiet grace. But David could see something in her expression that suggested the morning's events had awakened something she wasn't entirely comfortable with. The competitive warrior was fully awake now, and there would be no putting it back to sleep. The celebration lunch at the range's modest cafe should have been a moment of triumph for Sarah. But David noticed her growing discomfort as more people approached their table. Word of her perfect shooting had spread beyond the range, and several competitive shooters from other facilities had arrived, hoping to meet the woman who had achieved what many considered impossible. Sarah picked at her sandwich while politely deflecting questions about her background and training. Each inquiry about her military service or shooting experience was met with the same diplomatic evasiveness she had perfected over the years. But David could see the toll it was taking. The quiet woman who preferred anonymity was struggling with the attention her skills had generated. "So where did you really learn to shoot like that?" asked Jim Morrison, a former Marine sniper who had driven 30 miles after hearing about the morning's competition. "I've worked with some serious operators, and I've never seen anyone put together a performance like that." Sarah's hands tightened almost imperceptibly around her coffee cup. "Just practiced a lot," she said, her voice carrying a finality that should have discouraged further questions but rarely did. David recognized the signs of someone reaching their limit with unwanted attention. Throughout his career, he had worked with operators who preferred to remain in the shadows, people whose effectiveness depended on their ability to blend in and avoid notice. Sarah clearly belonged to that category, and the morning's competition had pushed her uncomfortably into the spotlight. "Maybe we should call it a day," David suggested, reading the situation correctly. "Give everyone time to process what they saw this morning." Sarah shot him a grateful look and began gathering her belongings. As they prepared to leave, Marcus approached one final time, his expression serious and thoughtful. "I know you don't want to talk about your background," he said quietly, "but I hope you'll consider getting back into competitive shooting. Talent like yours shouldn't be wasted." Sarah paused at the door, her dark eyes studying Marcus with an intensity that made him suddenly aware he was in the presence of someone truly dangerous. "Competition was never really the point for me," she said, "but I appreciate the thought." As they walked to the parking lot, David found himself studying Sarah with growing certainty about her true background. Her shooting had been exceptional, but it was her behavior under pressure that truly marked her as elite. The perfect calm, the methodical preparation, and the ability to perform flawlessly when everyone was watching. These were the hallmarks of someone who had operated at the highest levels of military capability. "Want to get some real coffee somewhere quieter?" David asked as they reached their vehicles. "I know a place where nobody will ask about your shooting." Sarah hesitated, torn between her natural inclination to retreat into solitude and a growing appreciation for David's respectful approach to their acquaintance. I don't really do the social thing very well anymore, she admitted. 3 years of night shifts and minimal human contact will do that to you. I get it, David replied. Transition back to civilian life isn't always easy, especially for people with our kind of background. No pressure, just thought you might appreciate talking to someone who understands what it's like to carry skills that most people can't relate to. This casual reference to our kind of background caught Sarah's attention. She had suspected David might have serious military experience, but he had been as circumspect about his history as she had about hers. The possibility of talking to someone who might actually understand her situation was both appealing and terrifying. One coffee, she agreed, but somewhere really quiet. They drove to a small cafe in the mountains. 20 miles from the shooting range and far from the competitive shooting community that had suddenly taken such intense interest in Sarah, the establishment was nearly empty on a Saturday afternoon. With only a few hikers and local residents scattered among the tables, David chose a corner, boothed with clear sight lines to all entrances and exits, a tactical consideration that Sarah noticed and appreciated. They sat facing each other across worn wooden table, two people carrying invisible burdens that few others could understand. So, David said after they had settled with their coffee, want to tell me how someone develops the ability to shoot perfect groups at 1,000 yards? While carrying herself like she's expecting trouble to walk through the door at any moment? Sarah studied him carefully, noting details she had overlooked during their previous interactions. The way he sat with his back to the wall, his unconscious scanning of the room's exits, and the controlled alertness that never quite relaxed. These were the habits of someone who had lived in dangerous places and faced real threats. What makes you think I'm expecting trouble? She asked, though she knew he was right. 3 years of civilian life hadn't erased the survival instincts that had kept her alive through 8 years of classified operations. Because you sit the same way I do, David replied. Back to the wall, eyes on the exits, always knowing who's behind you and what they're doing. It takes serious experience to develop those habits, and even longer to accept that you're probably never going to lose them. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. For 3 years, she had felt like an actor playing the role of a normal person, always conscious that her real self was carefully hidden beneath a performance of ordinariness. David's casual acknowledgement of her true nature was both validating and unsettling. Navy? She asked, noting the tattoo partially visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. It was a trident symbol that most civilians wouldn't recognize. But Sarah knew immediately what it represented. David nodded, unsurprised that she had identified the significance of his ink. 23 years with the teams? Retired as a commander 3 years ago, about the time you probably left whatever unit you were with. The timeline wasn't coincidental, Sarah realized. The drawdown of special operations forces in the Middle East had pushed many elite operators into civilian life around the same period, creating a generation of highly trained individuals who were struggling to find their place in a world that no longer needed their particular skills. Your turn, David said gently. And don't tell me you were a supply clerk. Supply clerks don't develop the kind of muscle memory I watched you demonstrate this morning. Sarah stared into her coffee, weighing how much truth she could safely share. The classified nature of her former unit meant that even acknowledging its existence could bring unwanted attention from people who monitored such discussions. But David's obvious background and respectful approach suggested he might be safe to trust with at least part of her story. Special Activities Division, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. 8 years of things that didn't officially happen in places that don't officially exist. David's expression grew more serious as he processed the implications of her admission. SAD was the CIA's most classified operational arm, responsible for missions that pushed the boundaries of what was legally and politically acceptable. Operators from that organization possessed skills that went far beyond conventional military training. That explains the shooting, he said, and the way you carry yourself. SAD doesn't recruit ordinary soldiers. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and vulnerability at being truly seen for the first time in years. The weight of maintaining her cover story was exhausting, and David's understanding offered a glimpse of what it might feel like to be honest about her past. The transition out was harder than I expected, she admitted. Civilian life feels like playing a role that doesn't quite fit. The shooting today reminded me who I used to be, and I'm not sure how I feel about that." David leaned back in his chair, studying her with the analytical eye of someone who had managed personnel in high-stress environments. "The question is whether you want to keep hiding who you are, or if you're ready to find ways to use those skills in your new life." "What do you mean?" "There are opportunities for people with our background," David said. "Consulting work, training contracts, private security, companies that need the kind of expertise we developed, but in civilian contexts. The shooting community we met today, they could use someone with your skills to push the boundaries of what's possible." Sarah shook her head. "I can't take anything that would put me back in the public eye. My former work requires a certain level of ... discretion ... Even years later." "I understand," David said. "But there are ways to contribute without drawing the wrong kind of attention. Quiet ways to use your skills that help people without compromising your security." As they talked, Sarah found herself considering possibilities she had dismissed during her 3 years of isolation. The morning shooting had awakened something inside her that couldn't be easily put back to sleep. The part of her thrived on challenge and excellence. That found meaning in pushing human capabilities to their limits. "There's something else," David said, his tone becoming more serious. "The way you handled the pressure today, the absolute calm under scrutiny, that's not just training. That's combat experience at the highest levels. Someone with your background and skills. There might be people who would pay very well for your expertise." Sarah's eyes sharpened, and David caught a glimpse of the following week passed slowly for Sarah as she wrestled with the implications of her conversation with David. Her night shifts at the medical supply warehouse felt more suffocating than ever. The mindless routine highlighting how far she had drifted from the person she used to be. David's business card sat on her kitchen table, moved from place to place but never quite thrown away. Thursday evening brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was professional but urgent. Identifying himself as Agent Martinez from the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group. "Ms. Martinez, we have a situation that requires someone with your particular background and expertise," the agent said without preamble. "A hostage situation has developed at a research facility in Denver, and the subject has positioned himself in a location that presents unique tactical challenges." Sarah felt her pulse quicken despite herself. "I'm not active anymore, Agent Martinez. You should contact the appropriate military units." "We have," he replied, "but the shot required is beyond the capabilities of our HRT snipers. The subject is holding 3 researchers hostage in a laboratory complex, positioned behind bulletproof glass at a distance that pushes the absolute limits of precision shooting. Our intelligence suggests you have the skills necessary to resolve this situation with minimal risk to the hostages." The details were classified, but the agent made it clear that conventional approaches had been exhausted. The hostage-taker had chosen his position carefully, creating a scenario where only an exceptional marksman could end the standoff without risking civilian lives. "I need to think about it," Sarah said, though her mind was already calculating ballistics and considering the tactical challenges described. "We understand your hesitation," Agent Martinez replied. "But 3 innocent people are counting on someone with your capabilities. We can have a helicopter at your location in 30 minutes if you agree to assist." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her small apartment staring at the phone. For 3 years she had convinced herself that her former life was behind her, that she could build a new identity based on anonymity and routine. But the morning at the shooting range had awakened something that couldn't be ignored, and now real lives hung in the balance. She called David's number. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," he said, answering on the first ring. "Something tells me this isn't a social call," Sarah explained the FBI's request, noting the irony that her perfect shooting at the range had somehow reached the attention of law enforcement. "Agencies looking for exceptional marksmen. What are you thinking?" David asked after she finished describing the situation. "I'm thinking that 3 people might die if I say no," Sarah replied, "and that maybe hiding from who I am isn't serving anyone well. The question is whether you're ready to step back into that world, even temporarily." Once you do this, there will be other calls, other situations where your skills could save lives. Sarah understood the implications. Success in this mission would mark the end of her anonymity and the beginning of a new phase of her life. But the alternative was allowing innocent people to suffer when she possessed the capability to help them. "I'm going to do it," she said finally, "but I want you there as my spotter if they'll allow it." "You sure about that?" "We barely know each other." "I know enough," Sarah replied. "You understand the stakes. You won't try to take credit. And you read wind better than anyone I've met since leaving the service. Plus, I trust you not to ask stupid questions when lives are on the line."
Oh.
David was quiet for a moment. "All right, Emin. Where do we meet?" 90 minutes later, Sarah found herself in the back of an FBI helicopter flying toward Denver. Her rifle case secured beside her, and David reviewing intelligence briefings across the small cabin. The familiar pre-mission tension was settling over her like a well-worn jacket, uncomfortable but undeniably familiar. The target building was a pharmaceutical research facility where a former employee had taken hostages after being fired for theft. The subject, Dr. Robert Chen, had barricaded himself in a fourth-floor laboratory with 3 researchers, demanding reinstatement and threatening to destroy years of cancer research if his demands weren't met. "The problem is his position," Agent Martinez explained as they reviewed building schematics. "He's positioned himself behind a reinforced window that overlooks the parking lot. Our snipers can see him, but the angle and distance make a precision shot extremely difficult. Plus, he's holding the hostages close enough that any miss could be catastrophic." Sarah studied the tactical situation with professional interest. The shot would be approximately 750 yards through bulletproof glass at a severe downward angle, with innocent lives just feet away from the target. It was exactly the kind of challenge that her former unit had trained for, the impossible shot that required perfect execution under maximum pressure. "What kind of glass?" she asked, already calculating how bullet deflection might affect her aim. 3/4-inch polycarbonate, rated for small arms fire. "It'll stop most rounds, but high-velocity rifle ammunition should penetrate with some deflection." Sarah nodded, running mental calculations for bullet drop, wind drift, and the additional variables introduced by shooting through the resistant material. The mathematics were complex, but well within her capabilities. The helicopter landed on the roof of an office building, 6 blocks from the target, providing the elevated position necessary for the shot angle. Sarah and David moved quickly to set up their position. While FBI agents cleared the area and established communications, through her scope, Sarah could see Dr. Chen moving around the laboratory, his agitation increasing as negotiations continued. The 3 hostages were visible but positioned dangerously close to their captor, creating a margin for error measured in inches rather than feet. "Wind is steady from the northwest at 8 miles per hour, David reported, reading conditions through his spotting scope. "Temperature is dropping, which will affect bullet velocity. Range is 743 yards to target." Sarah made precise adjustments to her scope settings, compensating for all the environmental factors that would influence her shot. This was the moment she had trained for throughout her career, when all the theory and practice came together in a single, perfect execution under circumstances where failure meant tragedy. Subject is positioned behind the glass. Approximately 18 inches from the nearest hostage came the radio update from the tactical team. Negotiators report he's becoming increasingly unstable. Through her scope, Sarah could see the man's growing agitation. Her crosshairs centered on his upper torso. It's the only target area that would guarantee an immediate stop while minimizing risk to the hostages. The shot had to be perfect. There would be no opportunity for a follow-up. "I have the shot," Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the enormous pressure. Standing by for authorization, in the silence that followed, she felt the familiar calm settling over her, the mental state, where time seemed to slow and every sense became hyper-tuned to the task at hand. This was who she really was, and for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. The final authorization came through Sarah's earpiece with stark simplicity. "You are cleared to take the shot. Execute when ready." Time seemed to crystallize around her as Sarah settled into the perfect shooting position. 8 years of the world's most demanding training had prepared her for this moment, when everything depended on a single bullet. Traveling 743 yards through bulletproof glass to save 3 innocent lives. Through her scope, she could see Dr. Chen gesturing wildly at the negotiator's phone, his desperation evident even at this distance. The 3 hostages remained clustered near the laboratory's central workstation, their faces reflecting the terror of people who understood their lives hung by the thinnest of threads. "Wind steady at 8 miles per hour," David whispered, his voice barely audible even from inches away. "No change in conditions. Target is stationary." Sarah's breathing slowed to match the rhythm she had perfected through countless high-stakes operations. Inhale, partial exhale, natural respiratory pause, the moment when her body achieved perfect stillness. Her finger found the trigger's sweet spot, that precise point of contact that would allow the smoothest possible release. The mathematics were complete in her mind. Bullet drop compensation, wind drift calculation, the deflection caused by the polycarbonate glass, and the downward angle that would affect the projectile's path. Every variable had been considered and adjusted for, leaving only the execution of skills honed through years of training that few people would ever experience. Through the scope, she watched Dr. Chen move closer to the window, his agitation making him an easier target, but also increasing the danger to the hostages. Sarah's crosshairs settled on the precise point that would ensure immediate incapacitation, while minimizing any risk of overpenetration or deflection that might endanger innocent lives. "Shots," she whispered, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the Denver skyline as the carefully crafted bullet began its precisely calculated journey, for what seemed like an eternity but was actually less than a second. The projectile flew through the mountain air, cutting through wind currents and atmospheric pressure variations with ballistic perfection. The polycarbonate glass spiderwebbed around the impact point as the bullet punched through. Its trajectory altered slightly, but still true to its intended target. Through her scope, Sarah watched Dr. Chen collapse instantly, the precise shot having achieved exactly what was required: immediate incapacitation with no risk to the hostages. "Target down," David reported into his radio. "Hostages appear unharmed." Within minutes, tactical teams had breached the laboratory and confirmed what? Sarah's scope had already revealed a perfect shot that had ended the crisis without any harm to innocent lives. The 3 researchers were shaken but physically uninjured, their ordeal finally over thanks to a level of marksmanship that existed at the absolute pinnacle of human capability as they packed their equipment. Agent Martinez approached with obvious respect and no small amount of awe. "In 20 years of law enforcement, I've never seen shooting like that. The FBI would very much like to discuss ongoing consultation opportunities with you." Sarah looked out over the Denver skyline, feeling something fundamental shift inside her perspective. The morning at the shooting range had awakened her sleeping skills, but this mission had reminded her why those capabilities mattered. For 3 years, she had hidden from her true nature, convincing herself that anonymity was safer than acknowledgement. But innocent lives had been saved today because she had finally chosen to embrace who she really was. "I'll consider it," she told Agent Martinez. Though they both knew her answer was already decided, David finished securing their equipment and joined the conversation. "So what now? Back to the night shift at the warehouse?" Sarah shook her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth for the first time in years. "I think it's time I stopped pretending to be someone I'm not. There are people who need the skills I have, and maybe it's time I started using them again." The helicopter ride back gave her time to think about the future she was now ready to embrace. The shooting range had reminded her of her capabilities. David had shown her that she didn't have to navigate this transition alone. And today's mission had proven that her skills could still make a difference in the world. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Webb. The competitive shooter she had defeated days earlier heard about what happened in Denver. "If you ever want to try some real competition shooting, there are national championships that could use someone with your abilities." Sarah typed back a simple response: "I'll think about it." But her mind was already moving beyond competitive shooting toward the broader possibilities that David had mentioned. Consulting work, training contracts, specialized missions that required someone with her unique background and capabilities. For the first time since leaving SAD, she could envision a future that honored both her need for discretion and her desire to make a meaningful contribution. As they landed back at the staging area, Agent Martinez handed her a business card with multiple contact numbers. Whenever you're ready to discuss opportunities, we'll be here. People with your skills are rare, and there are situations that only someone like you can handle. Sarah pocketed the card alongside David's, knowing that both would be used in the coming weeks. The quiet woman who had tried to disappear into anonymity was finally ready to step back into the light. Not as the operator she had once been, but as someone who could bridge her extraordinary past with a meaningful future. That evening, she called her supervisor at the medical supply warehouse and gave her 2 weeks' notice. When he asked about her plans, she simply said she was pursuing opportunities that better matched her background and qualifications. She didn't mention that her background included 8 years with the government's most classified operational unit, or that her qualifications had just saved 3 lives with a single perfectly placed shot through bulletproof glass at over 700 yards. Some truths were too complex for ordinary conversation, but as she sat in her apartment that night, Sarah Martinez finally felt like herself again. The woman who had achieved perfection at the shooting range, who had earned the respect of elite operators, and who had reminded herself that extraordinary skills came with extraordinary responsibilities. The tattoo on her shoulder, a small eagle that had remained hidden under her conservative clothing for 3 years, seemed to pulse with renewed significance. Tomorrow, she thought, she might finally be ready to let people see it, after all. Some secrets were meant to be shared, especially when they could save lives.